probably almost all of you are connected to someone who may be a future student. So please think about encouraging people to head towards Western Illinois University. We really have, I think, a unique program. How many of you during your career would say that the farm average has doubled for corn? Certainly some of you. I mean, it's pretty impressive what has happened. So, Dave raised his hand. Dave, has your crop residue returned to the soil probably doubled along with that yield?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Has your soil organic matter doubled?
No, that's the problem.
That is a riddle that is a really serious riddle. I don't know how many of the children that you've had the conversation with turned around and said, well, your yields have doubled, that's cool. Is it because your soil has gotten so much better? That's maybe more analysis that your grandchildren are doing. But the reality is that in most cases, while we may have improved the chemical fertility of our soils, we haven't improved the soil organic matter levels or the soil structure or some of the other things that are the foundation of soil health. And so we are doubling our yields in spite of the soil health part of the equation, which is impressive. But what if we had implemented all that technology, the improved genetics and all the other things that we're doing so well, and had soils that are as healthy as our fence rows, or when we used to have more livestock on the farm or more diversified rotations, then we might have yields that were even more impressive. Okay. So, most of us are dealing with 2 to 4% organic matter, but that's about half of what that soil once had. And when we look at specific fractions of the organic matter, we are looking at even more dramatic changes. Okay? And these are some of the types of things that I think are getting measured as part of the Soil Health Partnership. So we can start to see whether cover crops are part of the solution. When we look at the big picture across whole landscapes, what we see is that certain parts of the landscape are really getting degraded. And this is this last 60 years where they actually had sites where they collected soil from the whole soil profile 60 years ago, and then they came back recently and looked again. But what they found was that hilltops and backslope landscape positions were significantly degraded. Basically, the places that you might think would get peeled off have gotten peeled off during modern agriculture, last 60 years. And catchment areas have more topsoil and deeper organic matter. That's not too surprising. So it all balances out, right? We have landscapes that are more variable, and these soils already were productive. They're not so much more productive, and these soils definitely have lost productivity. Okay. So when we think about soil variability, and a lot of you are doing variable rates and other types of precision ag approaches, and so you're thinking about variability, we need to think about how to deal with not just the effects, but also the causes. Are we causing our soils to become more variable? By your variable rate nutrient management, hopefully your soil test levels are evening out to some extent. It's hard to, you probably are never going to get them all uniform, but we also have things like tillage erosion. Everybody thinks about water erosion, maybe a little bit about wind erosion, but tillage erosion is basically your tillage tools acting like a plane, planing off, simply slicing off the higher areas and moving that soil downhill. That is a serious part of erosion that until recently we weren't thinking about at all. That definitely is a major driver of soil variability. When we think about soil variability as a cause of yield loss or a cause of yield enhancement, the biggest issue in most of our soils is water, whether we have too much water or too little water. Do you guys agree with that? So we can think about how soil crop management systems impact water. We impact the management of the movement of water, the storage of water, and the volume of soil from which roots acquire water, right? Those are kind of three main things. Which of those things are impacted by our management. All of them are impacted by management, but two of them are much more impacted than others. Water movement, whether you have infiltration versus runoff, that's strongly impacted by management. The depth or volume of soil from which roots acquire water is strongly impacted by management. Whether you have compaction layers, whether you have the location of the fertility in the soil, basically the physical properties that either inhibit or promote root growth, that's strongly impacted by management. The water holding capacity, is that impacted by management? It is, but much less. Texture, your soil type is the dominant control on water holding capacity. We changed that a little bit. If we want to focus on where we have the biggest impact, we should be focusing on water movement and volume of soil that the roots are using. Not saying this isn't impacted, but that's a smaller area of impact than these other two. Okay. Obviously, tiling has a big impact on water movement and volume of soil used by roots, right? And so, when we're looking at having an impact, we should be looking at what tools have the biggest impact. And tiling, obviously, is a major tool to impact those two things. No doubt about that, and you guys know that, and that's why we've had so much tile put in the last 10 years. This is kind of I don't know exactly what I thought. I remember seeing this advertisement for the first time and just feeling a little, uncomfortable with it. What's the message here?
Tile now.
Get it done now before you're prohibited from doing it. And, is this the right attitude? Obviously, we want the benefits of tile, but if there are real consequences of tile that aren't so desirable, we need to deal with those as well, right? Some of you guys certainly heard the term conservation drainage. The old perspective was move as much water as fast as possible. And now, conservation drainage can mean lots of different things, but it basically means move enough water to have the benefits, but not too much water to have the negative consequences. Anyway, there are no silver bullet solutions. Some people talk about tile as if it is the silver bullet solution for soil health, but obviously it's not. There are no silver bullet solutions that perfectly balance environmental quality with productivity and profitability, but there are silver buckshot strategies. And what do I mean by that? The idea that you have to have a systems approach that has lots of different things you're doing, not just one thing. This is the result of a group of scientists getting together about 10 years ago. They basically rated different factors that could impact nitrate leaching. And, the reality is that we don't know exactly what the impact is going to be, but I think these ratings show pretty clearly that some of these things probably have bigger effects than others. And switching to perennials, having a perennial root system has probably the biggest impact. But of course, until we have, real economic drivers of miscanthus or switchgrass or other types of things like that, or just a very different approach to livestock production, we're not going to have our corn and soybeans just switching over to perennials. Even though we know that in terms of nutrient retention, having that root system throughout the year is really probably the best thing. But we can combine summer annuals with winter annuals. Most of us are not growing winter annual crops, so if you're not growing winter annual crops, you can stick in winter annual cover crops, right? And that's one way to think about how cover crops fit into this bigger picture. Okay. Very simple concept is that if we can have a greener landscape, we'll have bluer water. And there's an organization up in Minnesota that has that name. Lots of different ways to have that greener landscape. It could be more grass waterways, more perennial species in our pastures or bioenergy, but it also can mean more winter cover crops. Okay. So, how do we get started? How many of you have looked at a farm publication in the last 10 years and not seen an article about cover crops? No hands, because there are so many articles. So obviously, lots of farmers have not implemented cover crops, but at least it is on everybody's radar. And certainly many seed vendors have gotten this call, right? What cover crop should I plant? Unfortunately, they're often making that call not now, but when do you get these calls, Scott?
It's too late.
In September, October, right? That's typically when the call comes in. And that's how they ask the question often, right? Just what cover crop should I plant? Well, the retailer should be responding something like this. Well, what do you want your cover crop to do for you? Scott probably says, well, why didn't you call me 3 months ago? But anyway, cover crops can do lots of different things. They're multifunctional. That's one of their strengths. And you have to think about what is it that you're trying to accomplish? What problems are you trying to solve with the cover crops? And I'm not going to go into any detail about these things. But of course, we also need to be realistic about the challenges that can be created by cover crops. Cover crops can cause problems as well. And basically our goal is to find the balance so that we maximize benefits and minimize negatives. And or when we have the negative effect, we recognize that there's something that our management impacted that enhanced that negative effect, something that we can adjust. And obviously weather is a major driver of whether things go well or not so well. But our management directly interacts with weather. So we have to not just lay it all on weather. Think about how our management is impacted by that weather. Okay. When we think about specific objectives, there are obviously lots of different cover crops. We heard very clearly Tim Seifert say there's one cover crop that I think really fits, cereal rye. But then at the same time, we were hearing that maybe it doesn't fit ahead of corn. You certainly don't have all of these different options realistically, but I think that there are ways to make more species than just cereal rye fit in central Illinois and western Illinois. But we need to start cautiously on a small scale with anything other than a species like cereal rye that is, really well adapted to being planted after harvest. Forage brassicas have great cover crop potential if you have need for forage. So when people ask me about low-hanging fruit in terms of who should adopt cover crops, somebody who is grazing corn stalks but doesn't have anything green out there, they are the perfect candidate to talk to about cover crops. And in terms of the economics of cover crops, it is just really obvious that if you're reducing your feed costs for that cover crop, it pays for itself very quickly. We got some different forage brassicas, and I just was really wishing that we had some cows on the farm when it looked like that. Yeah.
About what time of year was that?
That would have probably been October, late October. I think that's me hand harvesting some popcorn, so it might have been early November. Okay. People have concerns about grazing cover crops, that it might interfere with their following crop. Compaction is a issue that we need to be realistic about. But it's pretty clear that while grazing animals can compact soil, that compaction is normally quite shallow. The cover crop roots really help to resist that compaction, and many farmers are finding that that's very manageable. So there are lots of opportunities for cover crops. Only a few may be realistic for you. And you need to, think clearly about what your particular opportunities are, but also think about how they may be broader than you thought before. We don't want to have prevent plant scenarios, but anybody had a prevent plant scenario? Last few years we've had some serious rain that has created prevent plant scenarios. Did you plant a cover crop because of that opportunity? There were real opportunities created by that. Aerial or high clearance seeding into standing crops in late summer or early fall. Anybody done any of that? Okay, that's an opportunity. After early corn or bean grain harvest, that could be because you're planting a hybrid or variety that matures earlier strategically. You're doing that. I mean, we obviously don't harvest all of our crops the same week, right? We spread out that season, so we can be strategic about planting our earlier maturing crops where we want to put the cover crop. And then, of course, after full season corn or bean grain harvest, but we don't have very many, species of cover crop that will fit there. Okay. Anybody heard of Cameron Mills? Anybody know Cameron Mills? Very innovative farmer in Indiana, and he's somebody who he's been using cover crops for many years, large scale, and he's thought about how to adjust his cash cropping system to make cover crops work better. But he is also very profit driven. He wants to have his cash crops very profitable. He's not going to compromise cash crop profitability just so he can grow cover crops, but he also is willing to adjust the cash cropping system to make the cover crops more effective. I think we all can think about that. This is a great webinar that some of you might want to watch. In terms of the timing of cover crops, there are some tools out there. Anybody ever seen this screen before? Anything like that? So this is the Midwest Cover Crop Council website, and it's kind of a one-stop shopping place for cover crop information. Every extension bulletin from every Midwest state and also some of Southern Canada is all on one website. And they have this tool. You can put in specific counties in Illinois and put in attributes, what you're trying to achieve, put in soil properties, and it helps you pick out which cover crops are a better fit. It's not the perfect tool, but it is a good place to start. Traditionally, we did used to have more cover cropping than we have today. It was a long time ago when we used to have a lot more cover cropping, but when we had small grains, it was pretty common to plant red clover into the small grain as cross seeding, right? And that was a pretty tried and true system. We do some of that at the research farm I manage, and it works, I would say 9 years out of 10. But if you don't have the small grain, obviously that's not your option. Okay. If you have a small grain and you haven't done red clover for whatever reason, or it failed, you then have a lot of opportunities after the small grain. Most of us would not be thinking about double cropping beans. After we've harvested that small grain, we have a real window of opportunity for different types of cover cropping approaches. Okay? When you hear about these crazy mixtures of cover crops, they're almost always being planted after a small grain. Even if you are not interested in a small grain rotation, or the elevator you sell to doesn't even receive small grains, you may be doing some tiling or have some specific reason why you plant a small patch of small grain somewhere. And that's where you can just get your, dip your toe in the water and try some of these things. Are we getting effective multitasking or cover crop chaos by doing these mixtures? From a researcher perspective, it feels like cover crop chaos. It's almost impossible to figure out what's going on. But in terms of farmer experience, farmers are having some really positive experiences with these cocktails, particularly when they have grazing animals and they can come in and graze that forage. That's when it's really working. So when you see the articles about Dave Brandt and folks in the Dakotas, all these people who are doing these extreme things. In almost all cases, they have livestock or some reason why the small grain part of it works for them. Okay. Drilling cover crops is a great option for getting good soil seed contact, but obviously you only can plant a limited number of acres. It's just you don't have a lot of acres per hour. One of my students, Austin Tomhave, he amazed me when I called him up, 2 years ago, and asked him, so how fast are you planting? He was telling me that he was drilling at 10 plus miles an hour. I was really surprised to hear that. But he's also using really low seeding rates, 20 to 30 pounds per acre. And unless you're getting good soil seed contact, you can't use those really low seeding rates and have confidence. But when you're getting good soil seed contact, you can use much lower seeding rates. And that's obviously an important thing in terms of reducing costs. Mixing fertilizer and cover crop seed can work well, whether it be with a fertilizer buggy or fertilizer truck or airflow system. That's a well-proven system. You can, after you broadcast it, you can come back with a tillage tool, or you can do the two things together. And there's a big operation over in Western Illinois. They grow 3,000 plus acres of cover crops, and it's mostly being put on with 40-foot vertical tillage tool and an air box. This is not a picture of their system, but they're planting more than 40 acres per hour to the cover crops. Aerial seeding has long been used to improve post-harvest grazing. How many of you have had a success with aerial seeding? How many of you have had a failure with aerial seeding? I don't think you can do aerial seeding over an extended period and not have some failures. That is part of the equation, because the weather has to cooperate for this to work well. At the same time, there are management issues that can be done better or worse in terms of making this work. You want to be set up for the most efficient aerial seeding possible. It can look beautiful like that, seeded into soybeans, but the reality is that it seems to work better in corn than soybeans. I see more consistent results seeding into corn. Anybody agree with that? Attention to details required to achieve uniform aerial application of cover crops. You're not going to get uniform application like you would, with a ground-based system. That's not possible. But, if the aerial applicator cannot tell you that they have done something like that to calibrate their system for the particular seed that you want them to put out, then you probably shouldn't work with them, because they are not prepared to do it as uniformly as is possible with their equipment. Okay. There are ground-based rigs. Anybody had a ground-based rig planted into standing crops for them? Okay. Were you pleased?
Let's point out real quick, and maybe there's some other ones in the room, but we do have 2 applicators here that have Hagie actual applicators. Is there anybody else that has interseeding, that actually does that as a custom business? So Trent and Carly in the back and Darren Sass up here lounging on the couch. Both are running high clearance Hagie applicators as a custom business. So.
Are you still awake on the couch? Oh yeah. He's doing better than I was doing yesterday. And there, very quickly, we'll look at just a few other options. These are not mainstream options, but obviously some people are planting wild harvesting. Joe Rothermel's system, but is Joe here?
No, he couldn't make it today.
Okay, he's not doing this anymore, correct?
No, it worked, but he's even gone away from strip till completely back to no till.
Okay, when you are a farmer fabricator, sometimes you get excited about building the ultimate tool, and then you ultimately realize that it just doesn't solve the problem, and there are simpler. Ultimately, you come back to the simplest solution sometimes, rather than the complicated solution. I think strip tilling combines very well with cover crops, and strip tilling can solve some of the cover crop interference with cash crop problems very well. So particularly if you have had problems with cover crops, think about how strip till might work with you to allow you to achieve more of those benefits, but avoid the negatives of cover crops. Of course, you can plant cover crops with your corn planter, and we've been doing that now for about 5 years at the research farm I manage. Those are radishes that were planted on 30-inch rows, and that was 2012. 2012 was just a perfect year for growing cover crops. We had a lot of leftover fertility, and then we had lots of rain, timely rain, not excessive rain in the fall, and our cover crops just grew beautifully. And then we came back and planted corn directly over those rows. There are some large-scale operators that are doing precision cover crop planting. Anybody know anybody who's done this? Who do you know?
Sanderson's up in DeKalb.
They're I'm trying to think of the name in Indiana.
Rulons.
The Rulons are doing this, yeah. So, in terms of the most efficient use of your seed, you want the most, effective placement into moisture of seed, and nothing does that better than a corn planter. But obviously, it's wear and tear on your corn planter, and so you have to decide, whether that's something you want to do. You can get clear beneficial effects on the roots of the following crop when you are planting over where radish or some other cover crop roots have grown. And this is some data. I'm not showing very much data in this presentation, but wherever there's an asterisk, basically there were more corn roots growing at that depth. And this was following radish. Actually, we have 3 different things. Green was radish, no cover, and rye. So it was the radish that had the most root, following the radish where they had the most corn roots. And they saw that effect to a smaller degree with the soybean roots following the radish. So we have some clear benefits that are possible, whether it be erosion control or water quality or crop benefits, following the crop benefits. How do we quantify these things? That's obviously what we need to work on if we're going to make this appealing to more than people who just do it because of their culture of conservation. And I think that the Soil Health Partnership is, taking the right strategy to try and quantify these things. Sometimes it is very obvious what the beneficial or negative effect is economically. In terms of benefit, during 2012 and other very dry years, sometimes you see where the cover crop roots normally takes multiple seasons, but multiple years of cover crops have expanded the rooting volume, and you see dramatic yield benefits on your following cash crop. So that's evidence down in southern Illinois, where you have a clay pan or something that is impeding root growth, and you're able to get more cash crop roots deeper in the soil. The yield enhancement can be very obvious. Wherever you are getting the feed cost reduction, that can be very clear economically. Other times, the economics are harder to evaluate short term, but in the long run, I think in terms of soil retention, in terms of public perception of agriculture, we have some very major benefits from cover crops. Okay, we need to be realistic about the challenges. We don't want to sweep those under the rug. And if you're a service provider, the most important thing you can do is provide technical support when the challenges occur and help farmers think through what caused the problem, what could be adjusted, and that's more important than getting them to plant the first time. It's the follow-up that really matters. This is probably the most dramatic scenario I've ever seen of cover crops negatively affecting a crop. This was 2012, and we were using actually a 4-row planter here. Very small planter, but these 2 rows and those 2 rows were planted with the same planter paths. We had a spring planting of radish that we bought from Scott Jones. I don't know if I don't know if I talked to Scott enough about how to troubleshoot this problem, because I think it was so obvious that, you know, it wasn't something that really required any serious analysis. What was so obvious was in 2012, not just in this scenario, but this was the most obvious one, where we had moisture used up in the soil profile. Since we only had 3 inches of rain during the growing season in 2012, if that moisture had been used up, whether it be by a cover crop or a cash crop or anything, the following crop was not going to do well. And so these beans actually survived, but they yielded about 20 bushels per acre, and these yielded over 50 bushels per acre. So huge yield hit there. Many other years, this probably would have been the exact opposite effect. Most years, the extra moisture removal by cover crops is desirable on our farm because it's a wet farm. But in that particular year, it was, you know, as obviously negative as anything I've ever seen. Okay. So, I guess the most important thing of all is not to begin thinking seriously about cover crops in September or October, but start your planning today, and recognize that there will be positives and negatives that need to be balanced. But you can come out with that positive balance most of the time by doing good planning. Anticipating planting windows, matching objectives with species, confirming seed availability, making sure your seeding equipment is ready. How many of you first started looking at your corn planter the day that you were planning to plant corn? I mean, obviously you wouldn't do that, right? You start weeks or even months in advance servicing your planter. But, you know, if you are planting with a drill that you don't use for anything else, there are many people who plant the cover crop with a drill that they don't pull out of the shed until the day that they decide they're going to plant the cover crop. That's not obviously good management. Identify realistic termination methods. So you need to have multiple strategies because weather strongly impacts that. When I was talking with Tim last night and I was suggesting that he was trying to terminate his cover crops too early, you know, he obviously had a reason for that. He wanted to prevent excessive growth of his cover crop. But when he tells me that cereal rye is taking 2-3 applications of herbicide, that obviously doesn't need to be that way. If there was a cover crop that should be easier to kill, it's cereal rye. There are other ones that are much more challenging, right? And so, what do you need for Roundup to work? You need the plant to be growing. Translocation has to occur, and so I don't know specifically what happened in the years where he had it come back after multiple applications, but my guess is that the plant wasn't growing enough, or that he had something tank mixed with the Roundup that was interfering with translocation. That's kind of what we're looking at.
Or all of the plants hadn't broken.
Yeah, right. So why might that be? You have variable conditions in the field.
Different species or different.
Yeah, or if you're getting VNS, variety not stated cover crop seed, you do not have uniform, genetics, right? And so that could be another reason. But cereal rye does start growing quite early in the spring. And so if you're waiting until your cover crop is a foot tall, it's all growing well, cereal rye should be easy